All right, so yeah, my name's Corey. I'm at Gravwell, one of the people who started it. Previous to that, I was at Department of Energy, National Labs at INL doing offensive research. So Gravwell, if you don't know, is log analytics company. But before that, I did vulnerability research. And what we did was find ODAs. They would bring us equipment. We would find a novel way to break into it, and then there. So the point, and will be the theme as we go through this, is there were no indicators of compromise for anything we did. And that is kind of the underlying theme for the talk. Because we're going to be talking about a few different things. But Defender's Advantage is a topic I want to hit on before we get into the real-world malware analysis. So I think we've got a few things that are interesting. I'm just going to use this. I'm going to hold my phone as a monitor since I don't want to turn back and look at the screen all day. But right, so we've got rising data rates. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people struggling here. Like if you want to actually do threat hunting, you got to collect all this stuff. And I know from my days in doing the ODA type activities that sometimes the evidence of an exploit is a single log line. Right? And so if we have terabytes of logs and we're going to use some magical cyber tools to reduce these logs down to only the important logs, if we could actually only find the important logs, all of us would be out of a job because then AI would do everything, and it can't. I think, is anybody familiar with the IBM cost of a breach report? There's a really damning statistic in here that I continue to beat the drum on because I think it is one of the most important negative KPIs for cyber is the average attacker dwell time. The average amount of time that a bad guy has broken into your stuff in a breach and is there before anybody notices or kicks them out is 300 days. How many people have 300 days of logs? Not very many, unfortunately. And if you talk to incident response people, how many people have any logs when they show up? Unfortunately, not very many. So, and the really bad part about that is if you go to the IBM cost of a breach report from last year and the year before, this is trending upwards. We are getting worse at finding bad guys who are already in our stuff. And that's a problem. And the cost of searching logs is too damn high, but that's a different discussion. So let's talk about Defender's Advantage because this is something that I believe in, and I think we do a pretty piss poor job of in cybersecurity, to be honest. So what is Defender's Advantage? Defender's Advantage is when you know your environment better than the attackers do, as cybersecurity analysts, system admins, developers, et cetera, right? So and it is absolutely critical to defend the types of attacks that I used to make for my job, because there are no indicators of compromise, as we kind of talked about. So I'm going to use an obligatory Sun Tzu quote up here, because I think it makes you sound like you're smart if you quote Sun Tzu. But also, it's pretty interesting, because right, there's this paradigm of, hey, if you know the enemy and yourself, you don't have to fear anything, right? And if you know yourself but not the enemy, you're gonna struggle. And if you don't know either, then you're going to lose every time. But Sun Tzu doesn't say shit about what happens if you know the enemy but not yourself, because that's absurd in the context of an actual battle or anything. But that's how we do cybersecurity a lot of the time, is we focus so much on these enemies or threat actors and what they do and what is known bad, that we suck at knowing what we are about or what our organization is about. And lowest common denominator cybersecurity, I think, is the enemy. Because the types of detections that work at every organization are, by definition, not good, because they're going to work everywhere. And each organization is entirely different. So Defender's Advantage is really important. So how do we gain Defender's Advantage? Well, you need to have centralized logging, and you got to keep those logs around for a long time. And you need to understand those log sources and what they give you. My favorite thing is like MITRE ATT&CK framework. Not that I'm trying to take a dump on MITRE ATT&CK by any means, but if you have MITRE ATT&CK and you say like, oh, here's a technique or whatever, and we're going to detect this technique, okay, for what data source? For what data source? We want to see recon. What does that mean? Is that network? Is it right? And for each of these different TTPs, for every log source, you're going to have a mapping to those TTPs. And if you don't understand that piece and you're just trying to make the red boxes green from your cyber perspective and say like, oh yeah, we've got great MITRE coverage, do you though? You don't know unless you actually understand what your data sources are. And I think that's the place to start. Instead of starting from something like a MITRE map, you start from what data sources do we actually have, what can we collect, where are our observability blind spots, because MITRE ATT&CK isn't going to tell you actually where your observability blind spots are, because some of those might not even apply to you as an organization. So making sure that you have that and you understand it. You also need flexible querying. We're going to show that when we do the malware analysis a little bit later. Statistical modeling, AI models, et cetera. You want to be able to do that. System baselining, all these are kind of different words for taking the data and making sense out of it, getting value out of this data. And a lot of these techniques are actually useful for troubleshooting type things too. The same sort of techniques that you use to detect unusual logins are the things that you use to find a switch that might be failing because the switch port's going up and down or whatnot, right? These are statistical things. And canaries, anybody use canaries in their environment, just out of curiosity? I don't see a lot of hands. You can go like this, maybe? Because, OK, that about matches my expectation, which is almost nobody. Canaries are phenomenal, right? Because no one should touch these devices or these VMs that you've got set up. And so an alert on, hey, somebody tried to log into this canary machine is going to be a lot stronger because you know that no one should touch that thing, right? And if it starts happening, then you should be alarmed. But that's an example of like the absolute lowest hanging fruit when it comes to Defender's Advantage, and we're not even doing it. And that's a problem. So I like to do this quote as well to kind of frame the discussion. This is from Spath at Purdue. A system is good if it does what it's supposed to do, and it's secure if it doesn't do anything else. And that's an important thing because when I was on the red team side, we did a whole lot of living off the land type stuff. And if you're living off the land, you're using all the same systems that are good, but in a context that is bad. And that context part is the really tricky part. And that's where it requires work. So let's take a basic example. So if we take and we grab a statistical model about how our hosts are communicating. So this is something that I like to do. It's just sort of a statistical baselining. The marketing folks would probably call this machine learning, but it's just stats. Right? And what we're saying is, for east-west traffic, let's build a statistical model on a per-host basis of how this host communicates with this host over here. And let's build that up and have a model, and then let's reference that model for times in the future or whatnot, for what we're going to do. So if we, and just as an example, this is Gravwell search syntax, but if you're using Splunk or using some other log analysis tool, hopefully it's got the similar type things. We'll get into the search specifics. I don't throw this up here to point out anything, but this is how it looks in Gravwell when you're doing this. But then you go from like, here's what a chart looks like. And as a human, we can see some of these things and be like, all right, well, there's a spike. That probably doesn't seem great. But it's hiding in kind of this noise where things can really get weird. And so if you use some advanced analytics techniques and just do something, again, this is very, very low-hanging fruit, right? Let's just drop the noise floor out. Let's drop anything that is 2 standard deviations away or less from what we're looking at. And we go from the noisy chart to, all right, here are our statistically significant systems. And this is real-world data in a lab, so it's smaller. So it's not fair of me to stand up here, but nobody vetted my slides, so there you go. But this is, right, so this host sticks out, and I can personally say this is some IoT bullshit that I bought and stuck in, and this thing scans my network once every couple days and then talks back to Google, which I don't really like, but this is an example of like, okay, if we can do this type of thing, this is a low-hanging fruit type thing, how do we find how our systems normally operate, and how do we find when they're operating out of spec, right? So the system in this case is my entire network and the hosts that communicate with each other. But that's sort of the point about Defender's Advantage and things is your systems will change and the types of analytics you do for those different systems change. And you have to tailor that to the thing. And it is hard. I'm not up here saying that this is easy. This requires humans who know things. Because AI is not going to do this for you either, as much as we want it to. But the other thing is data complexity is growing. So I love this XKCD. We've got 13 competing standards or whatever, and then some smart people get in a room and they say, I know, let's make a new standard, and now you have 14 competing standards because that's how it works. And this is how it works with data and logs and this type of thing. If anybody's in this room and you deal with logs on a day-to-day basis, you know that they're all over the place when it comes to how the quality of those logs and things. And this talk isn't necessarily about that, but we want to make sure that we can handle the data of any format, regardless of where it comes from. So this is an explicit example from my own lab, from my home lab. We have, I've got DNS stuff in here, and then this one in here is a Ubiquity access point. Anybody have Ubiquity Wi-Fi access points, or you know about it? Their logs are trash in terms of, they say that they output syslog, right? They export syslog, but it's not syslog. So if your log receiver requires syslog, you're going to dump this log in the garbage because it doesn't parse correctly. But that's where something like, to toot our own horn a little bit, that's where Gravwell, and actually Splunk shares this philosophical approach. We want to take the data in its raw format and then analyze it, ask the questions later, because you don't have any guarantees that the log format is going to be in a valid format, but you need to analyze it. And so doing something like that is digging in there. And one argument might be, all right, well, everything is JSON now, right? We've got data lakes, which I hate that this term has been ruined, but some things like Snowflake or whatever that are just big JSON stores, or S3 buckets. We can shove everything in JSON. First off, it's not all JSON, and if you take something like NetFlow and wrap it in JSON to put it in one of those buckets, you've taken, what, 53 bytes of information and turned it into 6K or something, which is absurd. But also, JSON has its own problems by itself. And I love this. This is a real log from a real system that has this schema here where we've got event type dot, right? Like if anybody know how to address things in JSON, you're going to do event type dot description to get to the description. Well, you have to do event type dot tag, which is such a... And then later on in the same schema, asset underbar dot tag as a single thing. Like this is, that's why whoever made this deserves every minute they spend in traffic. This is bad. But this is a real product that is very expensive if you buy it. So it's ridiculous. Likewise, Microsoft Sysmon. Anybody have Sysmon? Sysmon's a phenomenal tool for, if you don't have a paid EDR especially, put Sysmon on your stuff, phenomenal endpoint, and it's totally free. Phenomenal endpoint information, totally free. But even within Sysmon, Sysmon is XML, which sucks, and it has things like key value in the middle of it as well. So in the data, you have to be able to handle data formats. Even though this is XML, they abandon XML when it comes to the actual, I don't know why. That's a Microsoft question. And so you've got to be able to take out these individual keys and then parse them differently. So here's an example of what that looks like in Gravwell. We're using the winlog to parse the XML and then piping that into a key value to parse out the different hashes so that we have the final SHA-256 hash that we can compare against our threat list of known evil hashes. Right? So there's a basic, lowest common denominator IOC type thing. But you got to be able to do these multiple levels of parsing, or at least I think it should be flexible for the user to be able to do that. A lot of tools will do this on behalf of people, but the problem then becomes if that changes or the log format changes or whatnot, then you're waiting on a vendor before you can continue your investigations, which is absurd. So let's get into an actual threat hunt. So this is evaluating some malware, doing some activities, and we're just going to look at the raw logs and the data that's come out of this. It's going to mostly be using DNS as we do things. So with any threat hunting, you're going to have a tip and then a hunt type of process. So there's always something that triggers the spidey sense for an analyst or something that you're looking into. In this example, again, this is a little bit contrived because I normalized out the other data, but in this example, there was an entropy spike. So does anybody know what entropy is? It's basically the randomness of your data. So there was a spike in randomness of DNS logs, which triggered the investigation. And in getting into that, also a spike in NX domain, which NX domain is the response you get if the server basically is like, that domain doesn't exist. Right? That's an NX domain response. So you get that. And if we zoom into the time frame, here's what those logs look like. So it is evil.gravwell.io is obviously, that's been changed from any sort of actual server for the purposes of this demo. But then you've got DNS logs, and hidden in there you've got this evil.gravwell.io with a bunch of junk in front of it, a bunch of random bytes that are broken out. And that is, so these are DNS requests that are going out from some of the systems on our network. So they're using DNS as a covert communication channel back to their C2. This is what I mean by living off the land, right? Like they're using DNS. It's not like they're creating new things. And why do you use DNS? So DNS is a great covert communication channel because it always works. This is the classic troubleshooting diagram for anybody who's done IT or sysadmin type things. Oh, my network is broken, or this system is broken. Well, why is it broken? Is it DNS? And you say, no, it's not DNS. And you go through, and yeah, it's always DNS. That's how the diagram works. It's always DNS because it is. It's always DNS. If something's broken, it's because DNS is broken. And so even like isolated, right? You run some Kubernetes thing in some isolated thing. If it can't get back out or whatever, or your DNS is turned off, it will not work, even though it doesn't actually need DNS to work. That's why this is such a thing. So DNS almost always works, which is what makes it a great covert channel. A lot of times you might block other communications out, but it's still going to talk to your DNS server. And what does your DNS server do? Probably forwards it on back to their C2 type stuff. Because it's going to, that's naturally how DNS looks, right? So if this host says, it's using, this is, my left hand is your DNS server. This host says, hey, where's evil.gravwell.io? It goes out here, and if your DNS server doesn't know, it'll go ask somebody else. That's how DNS operates. And then later it goes and asks the evil.gravwell server, and they get the full string of what happened. So all this information is getting back to them. I was interested in like you could stop there. Right? We could be like, all right, we've got an indicator of compromise. Evil.gravwell.io is clearly bad, so anybody communicating with them, we're just going to say, done. However, I don't like to stop investigations there. I like to learn more about what the attackers are doing. I'm interested in more things because you might be able to speed up investigations that way. Or they might use alternate things because evil.gravwell.io might actually be some grandma's recipe website that she hosts that got compromised that the bad guys are hosting stuff on, right? So it doesn't even necessarily mean that this is a bad guy controlled URL probably, or domain, but it may not be one that the bad guys set up for this. So that's how indicator lists work in general, which you got to be careful of. But I was really interested in, okay, it looks like there's kind of definitive parts to this. I know what. Let's use regular expressions to crack out the different elements to this. And this XKCD is also great because anytime, like there's that common quote, some people faced with a problem think, I know, I'll use regular expressions. And now they have two problems. But I will beat this drum anytime I get the opportunity to be on a stage. If you are in blue team cybersecurity, and you have to look at logs or data, or you're trying to find bad guys, if you get good at regular expressions, your job will be much easier and you will be much more effective. Regular expressions are useful and very, very powerful for digging in things because it lets you pull out different pieces of the data. And if you don't know, Regex 101 is a great resource to help build regular expressions. It helps you see kind of how things are doing. So this coloring is what this website did for me. And we actually have a mirror of this as well. So with a regular expression, I can pull out things like, okay, there's kind of a clear header on the front because there's some data and then an underbar and then more data and then another underbar and then a little bit of additional info. So with regular expressions, I want to crack this out and do this. And so if we take, and then I'm going to bring it back into Gravwell because that's the tool that I'm going to use to analyze this, but you could also do this in Splunk or something, right? So then we split it up into columns. So we've got a header, an inner, and a footer. And when looking at the data in this way, I mean, even on this right here, we can see, right, like this footer thing is a clear sequence number of some sort. And then once we had all of them up there, then you could see like the headers would change occasionally and the sequence numbers would reset themselves. So it was pretty obvious that the header was some type of identification for the payload. And then you have the data in the middle and then a sequence number for the data. So I'm thinking, hey, can we reassemble this? Can we reassemble the entire payload, right? So we've got this spread across multiple DNS, because DNS is limited to only a certain number of characters. But if you have, if a bad guy's going to send megabytes up, then they've got to split it up into little individual chunks. So that's what the sequence numbers are all about, right? Because the bad guys are splitting up a bigger payload into small pieces. And so me as an analyst, I say, well, I want to reassemble that. What are they sending out exactly? And so in Gravwell, what I'm using is I'm doing some integer casting because this is hexadecimal. I want to convert this just into an integer so that me as a base 10 human can have a better view on it. And I also want to sort by that sequence number just so that I'm getting the full payload in an order in order to see what's going on. And so by doing that, then we can see, yeah, all right, we're going to sequence number, we're going to put it together. And then using a different methodology within, we can combine those and start to reassemble the attacker payload now that we have the order and the header to split between the different things. And so within Gravwell, that's using our transaction module, but it's essentially like take a key and kind of smoosh the things. Here's where one stops and one ends, and the next one starts, in order to do that. And really, if you've got an analytics tool, it should support this type of stuff. And if it doesn't, then you might have to write code for it, which nobody wants to do. But if your tool can help you with this, that's good. And this is a very common thing. Like we're doing it in kind of an esoteric, right? We're analyzing some malware exfiltration, but this type of stuff is also really useful for standard logs. So does anybody have bind as your DNS server? Okay, that's good. I think it's on the way out. But bind, notoriously, its DNS logs were like, so you saw a DNS mask in here that says this host requested this address and its IP is this, right? It kind of puts everything in one message. That's called like an atomic log. But not all logging is created equal, and many providers will split up logs across entries. So like bind will say, host A has made a request. And then it'll say, I got a request for evil.gravwell.io. And then it'll say, the result is this, across different entries, which is a nightmare when you want to reassemble that stuff. And this is exactly like how we're reassembling payloads right here from an attacker perspective. That's how you reassemble those types of logs when they're split across. But that's getting into what makes a good log versus bad log, which is not necessarily the primary point. So once we analyze it, then we're going to use a file type module, which basically the file type module in Gravwell works pretty much the same as the file command on Linux. If anybody's a Linux person in here, there's a file command in Linux that you run, and it takes a look at some bytes. It uses magic numbers and a little bit more heuristics to say, here's what this data is. And it is just a guess because you're looking at primarily the first few bytes of it. But I ran this, and it said, all right, your file types are images and audio. Which was really interesting and kind of made the eyes go wide a little bit because that was not what I was expecting at all. In terms of, according to the analysis so far, we believe that the attackers get control of this thing and then are taking data. Where did it come from? We don't know yet, but they're taking video and audio data, encoding it as text, splitting it up into pieces, and then sending that out via DNS, which is fun. So we went from that raw data, right? Again, the tip started with, hey, we've got a higher level of entropy and a higher level of NX domain, and we've got raw DNS logs. And then I said, well, I'm not, we could stop there with an IOC, but I want to figure out more. And so we use this Linux CLI type of analysis where we're piping modules into each other to add in the different layers of analysis on top of this. And then we can figure out what are the bad guys sending out and what are they doing. And this malware, what it does is it grabs the camera and it actually uses facial recognition. So it doesn't send out a face that it's seen before. But it opens the camera and looks for faces, and if it finds one that it hasn't seen before, then it'll encode that and send it out. And if a face comes into frame after not having one in frame, then it will turn on audio as well to try and catch something, I guess. And then with further analysis, we can actually decode this because it's a browser and it'll play anything mostly. So there's the video and audio that goes. So we go from raw logs on the left to the attacker payloads on the right. Which then, from one perspective, it's like, who cares? And to an extent, I agree that this is somewhat academic. Most folks wouldn't need to get into this level, but those who would, right, would gain additional benefit in their investigation. Because, you can see when people reach out. But again, if they don't go to evil.gravwell.io, maybe they go to evil.gravwell.com instead, then you might miss it with your standard IOC. And so by building something that actually analyzes the payload and looks for things, then we can use the attacker's payload against them and take the pictures that we see, and then we know exactly whose accounts are compromised, right? And which devices are potentially compromised. So it helps speed up the investigation and help you get to that root cause even better when you can do some of this analysis if you have the advantage of it not being encrypted or whatnot in here. So I have a couple takeaways, and then I want to do a little bit of a discussion that doesn't have slides to it. But yeah, key takeaways are the threat hunting and forensics just helps speeds up the forensics, speeds up threat investigation, right? Like the goal of this is Defender's Advantage is possible. And with Defender's Advantage, then we can drop that attacker dwell time. Again, that statistic scares me more than anything else that I see in terms of cyber WMDs or anybody who wants to talk about that type of nonsense. I don't care about any of that. The average attacker dwell time is the scariest thing to me. And the fact that that's going up is an indicator to me that I think we're thinking about this problem a little bit wrong. And maybe we can try and reorient ourselves. And I believe that if we all do a better job of getting that Defender's Advantage, take advantage of things like canaries, the unique things that are special about your organization, but that's hard. It's hard because it requires context and it requires people. And in an era of time where we are trying to do more things with AI and fire more people and line those pocketbooks, then that becomes even more of a challenge. So any executives in the room who are over that type of a thing, I know I'm just like some dude, but AI is not going to do this for us because AI sucks at context. That's sort of its phenomenal weakness. And that's exactly what you need to actually find bad guys and kick them out for things. And your security teams need to work with your developers. They need to work with your IT folks because those are the people with the institutional knowledge. Right? You hire a cybersecurity person and they come in and they might know some of the fundamentals or whatever, right? But they're not going to know anything about your org. So they got to talk to the IT folks. You got to have this interdepartmental communication. Security should not be a silo off by itself doing whatever the cool new thing is. And then maybe kind of the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is I'm going to steal this from a buddy of mine, Jason Larson. He's one of the best hackers I've ever known. He's a phenomenal security researcher. And he gave a talk at the S4 conference, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because I do think it is a really important message. And it's a talk about actor inflation. Because a lot of times what happens when we have threat actors or the bad guys who are doing this, right? So somebody looks at this, and so I've given semblances of this talk before, or I've showed people this malware activity before, and somebody goes, oh, dang, that must be a nation state. How can anybody be so sophisticated or whatever, which of course is not, sort of nonsense, but I'm like, why did you immediately go to that? Because I share some of these people with Jason Larson, but basically I'd like to divide hackers into three groups. You've got your nation state folks, right? You've got those, everybody loves to talk about them. We love making 20-foot tall statues of G.I. Joe figures and giving them cool adversary names because I don't know. I actually think that's stupid. But there's those folks, right? They're criminals. Why do we treat them like they're awesome? So you've got nation states, and then you've got professionals, right? And those might be professional criminals. They might be like what I used to do, or like Jason does, in that we get paid. Somebody says, here's the thing, we're consultants or whatever, please hack this, and then you do it. And you've got that group. And then you've got this other group over here, which I'm just going to call pot-smoking hackers. Because this is a group that, especially out in Washington, which was one of the first to legalize marijuana, these were a bunch of security consultants who became ex-security consultants because they liked smoking weed better. So they sat in a basement and they smoked weed. But then when the weed runs out, they go do a security gig until they can buy more weed, and then they go back in the basement, which is a life. It's not the life that I would do, but it's a life. And the fact of the matter is that those pot-smoking people in the basement are just as capable of the stuff that I showed up here or a lot of the attacks and things that you see as the nation-state people. They just don't do it. And so a lot of times when you see new activity like this or a novel thing or whatever, a lot of times people will immediately jump to nation-state. On one hand, because, hey, if you're a defender and it was a nation-state, well, there's nothing you could have done. So, it's not my fault, which is an unfortunate thing that does really happen. So you get actor inflation that way, but you also get actor inflation just in the, a lot of people have turned a lot of business into attribution and understanding the threat actors and whatnot. But I honestly think Defender's Advantage gets you more because it doesn't matter who the attacker is if they're in your stuff wrecking it. You don't care if to an extent, right? Like if you're going to prosecute or other things, that's a different scenario, right? But if somebody's in your stuff and they're there, you don't know if it's a pot-smoking dude who used to do consultants and now he sits in a basement until he runs out of weed. You don't know if it's a professional. You don't know if it's a nation state. There might be a little bit of variance in time between these groups, but they're all equally capable of messing your stuff up, unfortunately, right? That's the asymmetric nature of cybersecurity is bad guys, again, it might be one log line that tells you how they got in or whatnot. They only have to find one way in, and we have to defend all the ways. But unfortunately, we spend a lot of time on how the bad guys get in and not enough time on what does our environment actually look like? How do we defend our environment? What's unusual in our environment? What's usual in our environment? I really like, as an example, some of our customers are utilities or electrical or whatnot, right? Like SCADA systems, OT systems. Anybody in the room who works in OT will know that OT systems are really static by nature. Right? The equipment goes in, they hardly ever change, and so the fact that this machine talks to this machine only on this port ever might be enough to, you can set up allow lists, deny lists, or alerting. If any communication happens to this machine except exactly from this one on exactly this port. And they can take advantage of it. Can you buy a product that will do that for you? No, you can't. No, you can't, because no product, right? Imagine a security product that everyone could buy. How many in this room would want alerts from a machine that says, hey, I saw a new executable, or hey, I saw a new network connection? You would be drowning in alerts, which you probably already are. But that's the type of thing of like, for their environment, that is such a strong defensive mechanism that a lot of people aren't even doing because it's not something that you can get out of the box. And that's how I hope to change over the next bit. Who knows if it will? But that's my little bit of a rant about actor inflation and where we're at. So I think Defender's Advantage is really important because that 300 days is brutal. It's brutal. The living off the land, you got to be able to catch bad guys living off the land because that's getting more and more common as like bad guys haven't had to be stealthy to the most part. I'll also tell one more kind of war story. And someone was doing someone had made some proof of concept malware because sometimes we had to do that. And it got analyzed by somebody else. And the analyst was like, oh yeah, oh man, it's this Russian APT group, these guys over here. And I'm sitting in this room listening to this guy analyze this. I'm like, what? And my buddy who made it is sitting next to me. I'm like, why is he? He's like, oh yeah, I just took like a known malware blob and I just stuck it in my binary. And I guess they stopped looking. It doesn't do anything. It's literally just the bytes from a known malware that he stuck in his malware, and now the attribution's totally wrong, and they think there was some Russian group when it was just this dude sitting next to me. So not to pick on, I don't say that to pick on our arbitration people or the individual who's doing the analysis, but I think it's an interesting point in the greater stack of what are we focused on as defenders? What are we focused on cybersecurity people at institutions? Are we focused on understanding our own environments, or are we focused on the bad guys and how cool they are? Because they're not cool, they suck. So, and we're cool. And so we need to make that awesome again. So that's the end of my talk. Hopefully it was at least entertaining, if not educational, but let's all work together, see if we can get that 300 days down to something a lot more reasonable in the future. But thank you.
So we still have a little bit of time. Are you open for questions?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Questions, if anybody's got one, but.
So I'm currently a student and I'm a freshman going for a cybersecurity bachelor degree. Is there any areas of expertise that we should focus on right away? I know a huge part of cybersecurity is playing around with AI and seeing where that's developing, but do you think it's more beneficial to just kind of hack your own environments and just learn from that, or do you think it's kind of like more theory, what's more important? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Oh boy. Okay, so the question is, freshman in cybersecurity interested in, what's the balance between theory and learning new things about AI, or just hacking your own environments or whatnot, right? What should I focus on? And this is, I don't know. I'm just like some guy. So this is just my opinion. To channel the dude, that's just like your opinion, man. I think when it comes to cybersecurity education, we're doing some of our students a little bit of a disservice because what happens is a lot of times, this isn't true for every single role, so don't get me wrong here. But what happens is people come into the field and they don't know how computers work. And cybersecurity is about how computers work. So if you're not hacking in your own lab, if you don't understand, right, if you can tell me we need to defend against ARP poisoning, but you don't know what ARP is, that's an example of, and again, not for every role needs to know this, but that's a great example of what is this attack? Why does it work? What's the fundamental system that it uses? Because Ethernet, ARP, all these things are still used today. They're all the same protocols that we made in the 70s, 80s, 90s that are still used today. We're just piling more crap on top of them. But we're all run on all the same internet that was built in the very beginning, which are some things that have changed. So yeah, my advice is always put hands on stuff. Understand how computers work. Build a kernel in Linux, right? Like put a domain controller in your environment, right? Like see how these systems work, what type of logs they generate when you mess with them, or whatever. Break the stuff. And it's that type of experience that I think makes you so good in your career will just advance so much faster than a lot of the other people who won't put the hands on or who are like, all right, what's the notes to the test? Okay, great, I can accomplish the test and then I get my degree and I'm out or whatever, right? Not that I'm not necessarily knocking that, but I guess it's the more hands-on you've got, the more you can understand how computers work, the better you will be at cybersecurity because bad guys and cybersecurity, there's a whole lot of here's the known, but by nature, you're operating in the unknown and the weird, and the whatever, right? There's I'm probably gonna butcher this joke, but it's like a QA engineer walks into a bar and orders 1 beer, and orders 99 beers, and orders 999 beers, and orders -1 beers, and orders 0 beers, and then somebody comes into the room and says, "Where's the bathroom?" And the bar lights on fire. Because nobody anticipated that anybody, right? It's like, if you don't understand how computers work, then you can't operate in the weird. And that's where cybersecurity is the weird. So that's my general advice to it in general. And yeah, I guess you could play with new tech or AI and understand the limitations because a lot of, I think anybody who's actually played with AI will understand how bad it is at context or whatnot, right? And specifically as it relates to this talk as an example. So, because yeah, unfortunately, I guess I will also say this, and this is evidenced, frankly, by this talk. I don't know if it comes across, but I'm an old practitioner and I'm not a marketer. And my marketing team, this is a paid slot. I don't usually talk in paid slots. So that's why I was joking about my slides are not vetted. No committee approved this talk, guys. I could say whatever the hell I want. And none of these people vetted my stuff, okay? But that happens. It's the money showed up in cyber, I guess. This is me, old man yelling at a cloud at this point, I guess. But the money showed up in cyber, and so marketing showed up, and so then you run into a whole lot of this is what's good for our youth because this is what the marketing dollars and the VCs want. It may not be exactly what's good for you, but I can promise you that understanding computers will always be good for you. And understanding how to break them will always be good for you, regardless of what anybody says you're supposed to have for a degree. So that was a long-ass way to answer that question, but hopefully it was helpful.
It's entertaining, thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
So if attackers can get in systems and stay in them for so long, isn't there a risk that when you take the baseline of your system, it's kind of already skewed by the attackers in there that you didn't know about?
Yeah. The question was, if you baseline your system and the bad guy's already there, didn't you just put them in your baseline? Yeah, you did. Yep, absolutely, 100%. So you got to be careful about that. That is exactly a drawback to if you just take and you say, oh, I'm going to do a baseline and you broad swipe it. It's still a good place to start, but yeah, you got to be really cognizant of that. That's where it's kind of like old-fashioned police work, right? You got to track some of this stuff down. So you go, you may look for some of that stuff or you talk to a developer, but that's where just understanding how the systems work or how they're supposed to work that makes them good. That's what I mean is the difference between looking for what's not good versus looking for what's bad. And it is work because yeah, you have to understand that. But if you baseline, there's always that risk of the bad guys got in the baseline and there it is. So yep.
But if they're in your system, you have to assume they're not just sitting still. They're trying to
To an extent. So I'll tell you another story. I'll tell you a story. So the question or the comment, comment, which is a good one. So I'm not trying to, but was the bad guys aren't just going to sit there, right? They're going to try and find more information out about stuff or whatever. I'll tell you a story from. So we're in the NOC at the supercomputing conference. So supercomputing is, while that conference is going, it is the fastest network in the world, unsurprisingly. They use the cutting edge tech. And so at the last one, it was like 4.1 terabits per second output. So the NOC at supercomputing has to defend the internet from supercomputing as much as it defends supercomputing from the internet, because it has, like, you don't need a DDoS. If you point at that pipe at somebody, they're done, right? Because that's what it is. And so so we're standing it up, and it's a conference that only runs for, it's like a month of all the prep time and everything, and then you tear it down. So during that, a vendor had brought something in, and they brought it in, and it was already compromised. But we didn't know that, and so it sat there. And then on the last day of the conference, one of the things that they do is they open the pipes wide, because we're going to show off all the cool, awesome networking things. And it's a really fun exercise to see the bandwidth go wah, and it's just, you're spraying the whole thing, which is really cool. But we were kind of waiting for it. It was supposed to happen at, I think, 4 p.m. or something. But about 3:20, we saw the bandwidth thing go like this, and we're like, oh, did they start early? Right? Like, what's going on? You start checking with a couple things, and it's like, nope. Nope, that was malware. It was implanted on a machine that someone brought in. It did nothing. It did nothing until a certain time at which it went out to a DNS, got the result back, and then kicked off its payload. And that was when it did, I think it was like against the Slack server in China or something. It doesn't matter what it was attacking, but it was a full DDoS attack. And so the answer is sometimes yes, but sometimes no. And a lot of times that the lateral movement and like network detection stuff can be a lot more hidden. That's where LOLBAS or living off the line binaries, like those types of activities are really hard to detect without having a good understanding of your system. And even then, it can be really tricky. So often the bad guys will be trying to collect information, but sometimes no.
But even in that case that you just spoke about, there was some activity that took place. It would be dependent on whether the systems that you have in place can capture
Right.
the activity.
Right, yeah. Can you capture the activity? Can you?
They can.
Yep.
In some cases they cannot.
Yep. Anybody else?
What is one of your favorite EDR solutions?
What is one of my favorite EDR solutions? Oh, that's a question that gets me in trouble. So I'm going to say it's probably, I really like you can't go wrong with Zeek for network and Sysmon for endpoint visibility. And then they actually have Sysmon for Linux now, which is fine. It's XML, but it works. And that gets you the telemetry you need to do the detections and whatnot in some code or in Splunk or Gravwell or something like that, or in a SIM. But the paid EDR solutions will start to do things like detect and block and be more antivirus-y, but Windows Defender does a pretty good job now too. So a lot of times if someone says, which EDR should I buy, I ask them, are you doing anything now? Like, are you using even any of the free stuff? Do you have any telemetry? And if the answer is no, I usually say, why don't you start there? And just see what get the stuff out of the endpoints that you've got, get it into a place so you can see, because Sysmon will tell you every executable that ever runs on a system. It'll tell you every registry key that changes if you want to keep all that information. It gives you DNS logging for Windows, which is really hard to do otherwise, and a couple other things. So Sysmon is what I would point at, and the folks at the sysinternals team at Microsoft, Mark Rasinovich, have been working on that for a long time. It's a really good suite of tools for stuff. So that would be my recommendation, to cop out and choose a free version. But yeah, that's pretty much what I point people to if they don't have anything. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming. Hope that was fun.